Hello everyone, welcome to my second devlog where I'm just checking in about some of the progress I've been making on a recent game. In this game, you have a set of abilities based on the letters in your name. And not much has changed visually since my last video, but I have been this past month focusing on a design question that I've kind of been avoiding for a while. Since your abilities are based on the letters of your name, that's 26 possible abilities. That's a lot to deal with, especially when they can come in any combination, and each playthrough you're only going to have a few of those abilities. So there was that question of what should all these abilities be? I had prototyped this idea a while ago, and I just used the name Hector. And so that limited me to 6 letters to focus on, and I could come up with different ideas and see what I like to sort of sample this and see kind of what direction I wanted to go with these abilities. So 2 of those letters were purely defensive, and then the other 4 were offensive. Of the offensive letters, I had a mix of close, mid, and far range, as well as a trap that gets activated differently. But I wasn't satisfied with abilities being purely for combat. The game is a Zelda-inspired adventure, and in a Zelda game, many abilities can be used for both combat and puzzles, so I kept that in mind with future abilities as I was designing them. For example, D crashes into the ground to smash opponents, but it could also be used as a weight to press a button. Some of the abilities are directly based on Zelda abilities, so like Q is a bomb and works pretty much the same way it would work in a Zelda game. And X is a boomerang. I particularly liked the way that the boomerang works in Four Swords Adventure, and so that's how I made it work, how it can kind of be held in the air in place like this. And so I just kept coming up with these different ideas for letters over the past few weeks, but then I got about halfway through the alphabet, and I realized I exhausted all the ideas I had that weren't like super hard to make, and so things started to get tougher, and so I kind of had to re-examine how I was going to do this. And I found that ultimately I could use some of those existing ideas and just modify them a bit. So some of the abilities work somewhat similarly, but I still wanted to make sure that they had some differences. So like V, for example, shoots in a straight line, but W, at least in this font, it's just 2 V's. I just made it work like the V does, except for it splits in 2 and shoots in 2 directions instead of going straight. And then A also is kind of similar to that. It works like V, except for I made A ricochet. And then like G, I couldn't really think of anything for that. But since I already had X like a boomerang, I decided G kind of works the same way, except for if it hits something, instead of damaging a target, it will trap them for a while. As for how I actually implemented all this, this is kind of how I did it. First, I traced the shape of each letter. I initially was doing this in Blender, but it proved to be a lot faster just to work directly inside Unity and do it with ProBuilder. So I traced all these different shapes, and I created a different script component for each letter. I have an abstract superclass with some input events that the letter might care about, along with a do action async method that I can override. This method is where I give the step-by-step instructions on what to do with each letter. While each letter does this a bit differently, most follow this general formula. First, I lerp the position from its initial spot above the player's head to some spot where the action starts, usually in front of the player. This phase usually lasts about 1/5 of a second. Next, I either hold the position and wait for the player to release a button, or I just jump straight into the next step. And then the third step, after that, I perform some unique action for a certain amount of time. And then finally, when that time is up, it lerps back to the starting position and tells the name script to return the letter and make it available for future uses. I'll likely have to change some of these abilities as I get further in the project, but this will at least get me started. The next step is to actually prototype a dungeon to see how all this is going to fit together. Since puzzles will depend on abilities players may or may not have, the plan is to make dungeons somewhat modular with obstacles or even entire rooms that I can just swap out based on pattern matching against the name. For now, though, here's the full list of abilities in action.